We are now ready to begin the session on learnings from industry, early truck adopters. Our moderator for this session, Mr. Atul Mudaliar, Director of Systems Change India at Climate Group, will set context for this plenary and guide us through this fireside chat.
Okay. Good afternoon. Again, on behalf of Climate Group and pretty much everyone over here, would love to congratulate WRI and Niti Aayog for bringing us all together for the IFA Summit. And of course, Sharviri, thanks for this opportunity. It's great to have been worked with WRI and Niti Aayog on this platform. So it's a pleasure to be over here. We will start off and kick off with our next session. We are starting off at 2:45, so I'm guessing we'll probably have 45 minutes with us, maybe around 3:30, 3:35. Is that a good time for us to keep the time check? Okay, great. So welcome again to the session on learnings from the industry on early adoption of electric trucks in India. I have the opportunity to facilitate today's conversation, but I think I'm also tasked with, the great task of waking you all up from the afternoon slump as well. So hopefully with the opportunity of us having, some nice speakers that you'll hear from, we'll also kind of energize you as well. How are we kind of running today's conversation? So we'll start off with a few rounds of presentations. We'll have presentations from JSW Cement. We'll have a presentation from Ashok Leyland. And then we'll have a quick talk from Shree Cement as well. And once we're done with these three presentations, then we kind of move into a quick chat, which we're calling as the fireside chat. And I'll welcome the speakers on the panel as well to come when we kick that off. But with that, a bit of context setting for today's conversation. Can we have the slides, please? Yes, the next slide. The clicker is this way. Okay, just quickly about the Climate Group. We are an international NGO organization. Our objective is climate first, accelerating climate action by 2050. We run business-oriented campaigns, and then we also run campaigns which are also oriented towards action and climate action from subnational governments. We are looking forward to meet some of you at Climate Week in September. Okay, great. A quick thing about EV 100 Plus is a campaign which the Climate Group hosts. It is a global initiative which brings together forward-looking companies. And each of these companies that you see on the presentation today are companies which have committed to 100% electrification of medium and heavy-duty trucks. And they have taken targets of 2030 and 2040. As the Climate Group, we are also working with a few organizations, including some of our member companies, JSW Steel, IKEA, and Flipkart, with whom we are working on pilots. Last year, as part of the pilots, and of course, as part of the pilot strategy for the IFA Summit, a lot of the civil society organizations came together, and this was pretty much a year back at the Clean Energy Ministerial in Goa, where civil society organizations rallied support from the industry and were able to bring together an aggregated demand of around 7,500 trucks as well. Now, what's something that we need to see is how do we translate that demand into real action on the ground? Before we jump into the conversations and the presentations today, I wanted to, kind of bring to your attention to a couple of points that we've been hearing while we've been running pilots as the Climate Group alongside with a set of companies. We've pretty much consistently heard about three things. One is we need speed. The vehicles need to have speed. The vehicles need to be reliable. And third, but most important, is the cost, right? So when we speak about speed, the vehicles that be it logistical service providers or transporters, are looking at vehicles that are able to deliver on time, one, of course, and helping to, of course, improve their operational efficiency as well. Now, slower vehicles, of course, will affect the supply chains, and that's an important factor for them. Reliability, when we think of reliability, I think it's important for us to think of not just the vehicle, but the entire system, so to say. Not just the vehicle, it includes the vehicle, the business model. It also includes people and the charging infrastructure as well. So as a whole system, as a whole configuration, it's important for us and for the system to kind of deliver over and over again and in a consistent fashion. So that's when we speak of reliability, it's about consistency, right? It's about speed, it's also about consistency. Last but not the least, the biggest driving factor, not just for shippers, but also for transporters as well, is about the costs. That's pretty much, the make or break of everything that happens in this business. And hence, it's important for the electric vehicles and deliveries to electric vehicles should be at least at par with the conventional costs at this moment. And like I said, that becomes a big deal breaker for pretty much every transaction as well. With that, we close the presentation. I would love, not just the panelists for today, but also the audience over here to keep three things in mind: speed, reliability, and costs. And most of our discussions and conversations will revolve around that. With that, let me invite Mr. Vikram Gupta, Head of Logistics, JSW Cement. Vikram, welcome to the panel. We will hear from Vikram. He has a presentation. Vikram, we have the next 7 minutes with you, and we will pass it on to you, and you can also run your slides as well, right?
Okay. Do you want me to pull up my slides?
Yeah, I think that will be much better. Okay. Thank you.
Can you see the slides?
I'm sorry, could you please share the slides from your end?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Just give me a minute. Can you see the screen, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So allow me to introduce myself. I am Vikram Gupta, and I look after the logistics at JSW Cement. I welcome you all this afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share our experience. As you are all aware, my company belongs to the JSW Group, which is a $22 billion conglomerate spanning infra, steel, energy, paints, and of course, cement. We believe, and in words of the chairman, we are committed not just in words, but also in our thought, time, efforts in making sustainability vision a reality. So we put in our money where our mouth is, and you must be aware that we have interests with MG Hector or the MG Group for making and selling passenger EVs in India. That's only the beginning. You can expect commercial vehicles also coming from the JSW, share of the range of products. Just to give you an idea about JSW Cement, cement as an industry is highly, for want of any other word, we emit a lot of CO2, whether it is in making of cement or mining of limestone, and then finally also in transporting the cement to the customer, the end customer. For the world, it is around 608 tons of CO2 for every ton of cement that is made. In India, it drops to 560 because in India, we have adopted blended cements, as most of the companies have adopted. and that brings down your CO2 emissions. When it comes to JSW, it is at 241 kilos per ton of cement. So we already have a head start in terms of blended cement and other products which are environmentally friendly, which are of premium quality and also green in nature. Coming to the EVs, our journey started in 2021 when we had just moved out of COVID, and we had placed orders for 5 EVs. You'll understand why I brought this point out, because the speaker ahead of me mentioned speed. So while speed of the truck is important, there is no two ways about that. The right speed is important. What is also important is how the entire environment is geared towards the urgency to bring in EVs. Now, it took us almost 2 years to get the trucks after we ordered. And in between, there were a host of changes, like ARI changed the rules for certifying these trucks as roadworthy in India. The destructive battery testing came in. All those norms came in, and the entire process to get the trucks from date of order was around 2 years. We received the trucks finally in August 2023, and again, registration took us about 2 months. Now, why it took 2 months is because these were new vehicles, so we wanted to get them registered in a southern state, and the RTO did not have the right specifications to put on the RC. So there is some other authority which kind of updates those websites. And then we had to go to them with all the details and get that included as one of the vehicles which could be registered. Only then the registering authority registered these vehicles, and the whole process took about 2 months. So while we were doing this, the trucks remained idle for another 2 months. JSW Cement is blessed with a route where we transport almost 1.5 lakh tons of material, 75,000 tons either way. And the trucks running on this route would have load on both the sides. So these vehicles have been deployed there, which we thought was the most ideal route to check out the efficiency. These two plants of ours are situated around 300 kilometers apart. So the total run is around 600 kilometers. To do this, we had to put in 4 chargers. So one at the terminal end and 2 en route chargers were installed. The entire charging infrastructure was created by JSW Cement. And that is where, again, we faced another challenge of impressing upon the state electricity board to give us quick connections. So we received it in August 23. Registration happened somewhere around October, November 2023. Until about 15th of March 2023, we had to run these vehicles by using DG sets to charge them en route. But since we were determined, and the costs, of course, the costs were very high to use DG sets to charge them, but we were keen. We wanted to get the whole project off the ground, so we went ahead with that. And of course, all other enablers like finding drivers, training them, all of that was done. I mean, it was done in a way where, these things, the activities overlapped and we did not have to spend too much of time, had we sequenced them sequentially. It took us another 2 months, 2.5 odd months to stabilize the whole operation. So our experience, now it's been March 23, we have almost 1.5 years of experience with these vehicles. There are a lot of headwinds, that is what I would say. First learning was that there are very few leads where you can fruitfully deploy an EV vehicle because the fixed costs are so high that if you don't run them in a loaded condition, more you run them in the empty way, uh, longer the break even or longer the payback. The capex is very high. Plus, recently we had another experience where the roads got washed out. Now the diesel trucks took a slightly longer route to reach their destination, but EV trucks could not do that because we don't have charging infrastructure along that route. So they had to stay put. So this was another learning for us, and that kind of got us thinking that when we are doing a route survey, perhaps we need to understand if the chargers can be reached from any alternate route. The chargers always have to be in the circuit. Coming to the procurement part, most of the experiments that have happened thus far in the industry, in the cement industry also, I don't think there are many examples where transporters have put their money on EVs. They are still more comfortable with ICE trucks, and for a good reason. First, the capital cost is very high. Routes are limited. You have to follow a particular route where charging facility is available. So there are a lot of, in this, while we are maturing, in this intervening period, I think there are a lot of constraints for those transporters to come in and kind of invest in this particular product. Perhaps the biggest constraint is the availability of finance. Whomsoever we have spoken with, we have approached certain large transporters who are very, very large. I mean, fleet of 200 plus trucks. They have complained of very high rate of interest being charged. I mean, the number quoted is 11 to 14%. That is the rate of interest that they were expecting. And primarily because banks and other financial institutions are not very confident that if the EMIs fail, then how do they take back the truck and, to whom do they give it? Because the market itself has to develop. So these were the challenges that we faced, and we are still learning. It is early days for us. We are learning. However, all is not bleak. We certainly had, of course, the winning argument is that we have reduced CO2 emissions to the extent of running of 5 trucks. And the operational cost alone, if I compare operation to operation, then I think we have achieved costs which are 65% lower. I'm not including the cost for developing the infrastructure or buying the trucks, the mobilization effort, etc., etc. It is just the operational costs that I'm looking at. And maybe it is because of the trucks are new. We still don't know what kind of maintenance it will ask for. We are getting about 65% lower costs, which is very heartening. Challenge will be maintaining this level going forward. Because as the trucks age, the amount of maintenance that they ask for, or the kind of residual value I get when I try to sell off these trucks or dispose of these trucks in the market, is all unclear as of now. We will know as we progress on this journey. So we have done about 290,000 tons through these 5 truck trailers. We have carried about 32,000 tons, 290,000 kilometers, 32,000 tons. Reduced CO2 emissions of 90,000 kilos, which is almost 90 tons. And of course, running cost, like I mentioned, is lower compared to diesel trucks on the same route. Very same to same identical comparison, it is about 65% lower. Coming to, again, out of our experience and thus far, and what do you wish for in case you were to increase the number of EVs? Certainly, it makes a very good case for toll charge exemption. because waiting at the toll plazas also eats up battery charge, and hence the trip distance, that it could make without a charge. Very important point is that the battery in this truck, now these trucks were all 22-wheeler trucks. Ideally, a ICE truck would carry anywhere between 40 to 41 tons, depending on the material used for the trailer, the steel used for the trailer. In case of electric trucks, it becomes 36 tons. That is because the battery weight is around 1.5 tons. Now, our experience shows that there is enough and more power for these trucks. They have these power to carry 40 tons also. And I feel the authorities should seriously take note and increase the CC, at least compensate for the loss of battery weight. Because less load I carry, I reduce the earning capability of the truck, and it increases payback. It makes it a costlier proposition. As I have said, the rate of interest, I think there is a good case, given that we are all convinced that this is the way to go and EV is the way for the future. I think we should seek out ways of reducing the finance costs for financing an EV. And of course, lowering the cost of the asset. Today, EV costs almost twice compared to a cost of a similar ICE truck, a diesel truck. Now, given the kind of ownership of trucks that we have in the country, the person feels that why not put 2 trucks? My earnings would be much better. And plus, it gives you all the flexibility as of whatever is there in terms of infra, in terms of repair maintenance. ICE trucks have an edge, and there is a natural lean by the transporter towards ICE trucks. So I guess we need to reduce or work on, whether it is through reduction of customs and import duties, whether it is indigenizing them, transfer of technology, or there could be various approaches. I guess all of those need to be explored, and cost of the asset, which should translate into lower TCO, should actually happen to promote this in a big way. So, well, this has been my experience. I hope I've done well on time. Thank you very much.
Vikram, thank you so much for walking us through the journey of your pilots. I'm sure there's a bundle of information, as well as pretty much a masterpiece of how one should look at pilots and the way they think about it as well. So clearly, we'll come back to you with some thoughts as part of the panel. But as a next, let me invite Dr. Subramanian for his presentation. Yes.
Good afternoon, once again. Do we have the slides? Okay. I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to not use the slides. I'll just talk to a couple of points that we raised in the previous panel discussion just before lunch. So hopefully you can follow me rather than following the slides. So I'll just take about 5 minutes. And so one of the points that we raised in the panel discussion just before lunch was how we can do something in India for India, right? If we go the classic EV route, then, and all of us are guilty of doing that today, is when we buy a battery pack, we buy a motor, we buy some electronics, and we put it all together. So it's an assembly route. And today, most of us buy these things from abroad, largely from China. And of course, there will be policies that incentivize us to make these at varying levels within India, right? So we will start, for example, with battery pack assembly, and we may move on to cell manufacturing in India. We'll start with motor manufacturing, and still, I guess the magnets will probably come from China. We will also make some of the electronics But I think all of us know where the components come from, right? The components and modules are pretty much all coming from Taiwan as we speak, right? So the question becomes, how do you do things differently? What is in it for the future in India, right? Because if you proceed down this path, we are going to be dependent on China for pretty much all of the major systems, or at least the components, right? So motors use permanent magnets, electronics, of course, all components are imported. Yes, we are talking about making electronics in India, but again, we still need a lot of volume, right? And we need scale to match prices to what Taiwan can make. And of course, batteries and cells. So we launched in Ashok Leyland a concept last year when we celebrated our 75 years of existence. Ashok Leyland is almost as old as India. The history is that as soon as we got independence, the Prime Minister asked someone to go start a company of the nature of Ashok Leyland in 1948, because we needed to be in this kind of a critical manufacturing ecosystem. So we're almost as old as India. We celebrated 75 years. So we launched a concept, and we called it the Newton truck last year, right? And it's a concept. It's not a product, it's a concept. And I'll talk to you about what it actually means. Maybe I can just jump to one slide. How do you, this works? Okay, that's okay, I'll just talk to it. So what we did was we thought one way to reimagine electric, and people call it Born EV, people call it, there's so many names. So one way to reimagine is go right down all the way to the fundamentals, right? What we learned in high school in some sense, right? So we said, let's actually do that. And we realized that the one fact or one equation in physics that actually tells you how automobiles move is actually Newton's law, right? Is someone navigating this? Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to jump to this. This is called Newton's law, and I don't think anyone has escaped this lesson in high school. So I'll take you back to high school for a moment. So this is Newton's law, and it's as simple as what's written on the screen. It's F equal to ma, it's force equals mass times acceleration. So just stay with me for a minute while I explain this to you. I'm sure all of you have done this, all of you have studied, or even passed exams working on this. So if you just stare at this equation, you'll realize that it's very simple. It's only got two terms, mass and acceleration. And if you look at it one by one, the mass is how heavy your truck is, right? And or any automobile, it doesn't have to be a truck. And that part is obvious because you know that the heavier something is, the more effort or force is effort, more effort it takes to move it. Fair? That's the easy part, right? And if you make something lighter, then it obviously takes that much less effort to move it. So mass is the obvious part. The non-obvious part is the other part, and that is the genius of Newton. And that is all, it is stuff that we learned and probably forgot or probably did not interpret very clearly. So what Newton said is the amount of effort it takes to move something is not proportional to how far you move it, because there's no distance in that equation. It does not depend on how fast you move it, because there's no speed in that equation. It only depends on how often you change your speed, which is acceleration. So acceleration is change in speed, right? And that's a very interesting point, because it tells you that effort, ultimately fuel consumption, right? Fuel consumption is related to effort. Does not depend on how far you travel. It does not depend on how fast you travel, and it only depends on how frequently you change your speed. Right? So let's say you're driving, let's assume ideal conditions, because that's how we always start our physics problems, right? We assume ideal conditions and we solve these problems. So let's say you're doing Delhi-Mumbai Expressway, which is about 1,200 kilometers. And let's say you start from rest in Delhi, and then you accelerate from 0 to, let's say, 100 kilometers an hour. That is acceleration, because you're starting from 0 speed and you're changing your speed to 100. And if you do that, you are consuming fuel because there is a force. When you have an acceleration, there is a force, and therefore you're consuming fuel because it needs effort to move. But that takes how long? A minute, 2 minutes to accelerate all the way to 100? Let's assume ideal conditions, as I said, right? Let's assume it's a great day, no traffic, perfect highway, right? And there's no losses, there's no friction and all that. And we'll come back to that. So what Newton is trying to tell you, what nature is trying to tell you, is that if you drive at 100 kilometers an hour all the way to Mumbai, it takes 12 hours for 1,200 kilometers. Your speed is constant, which means you never accelerated, except for the first minute, right? So in the entire journey, again, except for the first minute, you never changed your speed, so there was no acceleration, and therefore there was no effort required to drive the vehicle, and therefore you do not need to consume fuel. It's a crazy fact, but it's true. Automobiles are different. It's not like other things that you encounter in everyday life. So if you take that light bulb that's shining there, you need to give a certain amount of electrical energy to get the light energy out, right? That's obvious. If you take a water heater in your home, for instance, you need to give certain amount of kilowatts to get the water hot because the water is increasing its heat energy, right? Automobiles are different. You don't need energy to drive an automobile, right? You only need to energy if you're a bad driver. And you know how bad drivers drive, right? So you've all been in cabs, or maybe you yourself are one of them, but where you brake, you give pickup, you brake, you give pickup, and pickup is acceleration. That is what consumes fuel. So we went all the way down to the fundamentals, and we had this very simple eureka moment, right? And that the fact that an automobile is different, it fundamentally, at its core, does not need fuel to drive any length of distance. So we asked ourselves, why does it need fuel, right? And that comes down to how we will differentiate ourselves, right? So the M part is obvious. As I said, we work on lightweighting and that's new materials and stuff like that. But the question on why we actually consume fuel is, one part is, of course, the acceleration. But even, let's say, assume that you're driving at a constant speed, where there is no acceleration, you still consume fuel because there are losses, right? So an automobile is entirely about the side effects. The side effects are the losses, the second order effects. The automobile is not really that much about the main effect at all. The main effect is you don't need to consume fuel, right? So what are we doing by putting a brute force, bigger battery for a bigger range in an electric vehicle? That's the question we asked ourselves, right? Because this unit of kilometers per liter for diesel or kilometers per kilowatt hour, which is the equivalent for EV, is telling our brains that the amount of distance you drive, kilometers, actually depends on how many liters or kilowatt hours you consume, which is wrong because there is no distance in that equation. So there is no connection between the size of the battery, or actually the energy of the battery, and how far you drive, right? So the size of the battery is unrelated to the range, which is the first crazy fact that has to be digested, right? So once we started looking at why we actually consume energy when we drive, it only comes down to losses. And some of that is listed in the red stuff here, right? So the losses are friction. Where does friction come from? It's primarily from the transmission of the automobile. Don't confuse rolling friction, which happens in the tires. That actually helps you. That's not a loss mechanism, right? So that's how you need that traction to drive. So the friction comes from the transmission. The other form of loss is aerodynamic, right? And that depends on speed. In city driving, it just doesn't matter. But if you're on the highway, it actually is proportional to the cube of speed. So the faster you go, it really starts mattering, right? So as our speeds increase, something like aerodynamics start mattering. Then you have things like rolling resistance, which is loss in the tires, not friction, but it's the fact that the rubber of the tire has something called hysteresis, which causes losses. So every time the tire turns, when it touches the road, it squishes. When it comes out of the road, it expands. So that compression-expansion cycle is a lossy cycle, right? So there are sources of losses, And we actually did an energy audit. So I'll stop with this slide. Energy audit of the vehicle, which is telling us where the energy from the battery is actually going. Right? So if we go by Newton's law, if you account for all the losses, you shouldn't have any piece of this pie left. Right? So let me repeat that, because I'm saying that the primary effect is you don't need fuel to drive. It's only the side effect, which is all the losses that matter. So in other words, if you account for all the losses, if I'm able to measure all the losses, then I shouldn't have anything left because there's no energy left to drive. You don't need energy to drive, right? So that's exactly what came out of this. The biggest piece of the pie is actually tires, about 40%, which is shocking, right? How much work is the ecosystem doing to make a step change in tires for EV? We're doing minor incremental changes, yes. But tires seem to be the biggest problem. And what is the first automobile industry in India that went electric decades ago successfully? It's the Indian Railways. Apart from the fact that it doesn't have batteries, it also doesn't have tires, right? So it's a very profound fact. And the lack of tires is actually what makes the train very efficient, the electric train very efficient. It also doesn't carry the batteries, which is a bonus. But it's a big deal, right? So how can we push technology, policy, the entire ecosystem to worry about these things, right? So you're looking at tire loss, you're looking at aerodynamics. This is a specific drive cycle. It'll change. This pie chart will change depending on what your drive cycle is. And then you're looking at a few auxiliary loads, which are a little small. I mean, your air conditioner and your steering pump, right? But those are a little smaller in comparison. We do have the same maps for IC engine vehicles, but unfortunately there, the diesel engine, which is so inefficient, is the elephant in the room, right? So that runs at about 35% efficiency. So 65% loss is straight away gone. So everything else looks pale in comparison, which is why this is a very interesting chart for EV, right? Because there's no IC engine, and then you're looking at every loss in the right form. So the yellow on the top left is what's regen potential, which is you get greedy in even getting around Newton's law, right? So whatever energy you actually need to accelerate, you're saying I'll recover that from the previous braking event. So even for acceleration, you want to get greedy and say that I don't want to consume energy because I want to store the energy as much as possible from the previous braking event. And today, regen is miserably inefficient, right? So that brown part, yellow-brown part is not a small number. So there also work is required. You have to work on aerodynamics, regeneration, tires, and there's a inbuilt in some of the other pieces of the pie is transmission. And I'll take transmission as an example, right? EV is giving us an opportunity to rethink transmission. Why did you need a transmission in the first place? Because your engine is in the front and your wheels were in the back. Right? You needed to move the power from the engine to the wheel, and then you had a propeller shaft, you had a universal joint, you had a clutch, you had a gearbox, you had a differential. All of that, in addition to adding cost and weight, is also adding inefficiency. Right? But EV, in the holy grail, you can imagine an EV with just one motor on the left, one on the right, and your entire transmission just becoming two pieces of wire. Right? So EV gives you that opportunity. So in the process of eliminating transmission, you will eliminate transmission loss, which adds up to about 20%. Right? So what you're seeing is that little gray piece, 2 to 5%, which is just losses we could not account for. Right? We just couldn't measure. Right? So just to dramatize that point, let's take 2% as what you have to live with. Just to dramatize and exaggerate the point, if you were to, in theory, eliminate all the other losses, so your 100% becomes 2%, you will run the EV with a 50 times lower battery, 100 versus 2, for the same range. Right? Because we knew upfront that battery size is not related to the range. Right? So battery size is just there for brute force today. Right? Because you're living with all these losses and you're not done anything about it. And most of us are converting legacy diesel or petrol vehicles to electric, right? So therefore, all those loss mechanisms are still here. So to me, right, one big agenda definitely for Ashok Leyland and hopefully for the entire ecosystem that's working on EV, is to push the ecosystem to work on these mechanisms. Because it's not about fuel. You would think that going green is about fuel, right? And you would realize that fuel accounts for such a small percentage of where the energy is actually going that it's not about fuel. You can go green, very green, by just working on loss mechanisms, something we're not doing today. It's an obvious fact. I just wanted to state it to you in a dramatic fashion because that's how you drive home the point, right? I'm not saying you can curtail all these losses. I'm not saying you can make these losses zero. Clearly not, right? But I'm sure there is significant potential because all these are untapped things that we have not done much work on. So there will be significant potential, and as much as you reduce, you'll go that much greener. So you can have an either-or argument, right? Either you can have a much smaller battery for the same range, or you can have the same size battery and you have a much longer range, right? So either way works. So I'll stop with that, just to kindle the imagination and inspire. And this is one of the paths, in my opinion, that will, apart from differentiating ourselves, will also make us more and more China independent, because the more you move away from these components, right, that are import heavy, and battery is a key portion, and if you can make it much smaller, it'll add up, right? So it seems to be a good solution, and it's based on very sound fundamentals. So I leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll go to the next speaker. We have Mr. Saurabh Palsania from Shree Cement. Mr. Saurabh, we'll have the next 5 minutes for you. We're just also keeping a time check as well.
So, happy afternoon and namaste to all of you. And I'll definitely stick to the timelines, as my other colleagues have almost covered what is all required to be done to boost the demand in the EV sector. So I'll just take you to the operational cost and what the industry is expecting. Industry means the people like us who are adopting the EV trucks is expecting from maybe the EV manufacturers or with in reference to the policy amendments. Practically, if we talk about EBITDA, that is the operational, earnings between EV trucks and diesel trucks, there is a contribution of, incremental contribution of rupees 11 or 10 rupees per kilometer in comparison to diesel trucks. But the same, when we talk about the profit part of it, then the fixed cost of EV trucks, because of the cost of the EV trucks as well as the other overheads, maybe the driver's salary and all, it takes away 7 to 8 rupees. So ultimately the profit that is, we are left with, let us say 3 to 4 rupees per kilometer. Now to come out of it or to make it somewhere, more lucrative or more attractive, if the toll charges are waived, then somewhere on a shorter run, it gives the advantage of 2 to 2.5 rupees per kilometer. And if the load to the extent of the battery is increased, allowable load or passing load, then another 2 to 3 rupees, you can say, per kilometer can be saved. So maybe that will give a leverage of 10 rupees per kilometer. Now to take the advantage of higher running, because presently when we charge the EV truck, it takes almost 40-45 minutes to charge if we have to charge it to 60 or 65%. And battery swapping, if it's introduced and it is capped at a price of, say, or subsidized at the price of, say, 5 to 7 rupees per kilometer, that will give a big boost to the industry. So again, repeating it, first is that the waiver of the toll charges. Second is allowable load to be increased to the equivalent to the battery load. And third is somewhere say to improve the running kilometers, like you might have seen what my colleague, my friend, Mr. Vikram Gupta have shown, that 5 trucks altogether have to run almost say 2.5 lakh kilometers, somewhere around 5,000 kilometers per month per truck. So to move the trucks to at least 10,000 kilometers or 1 lakh kilometer per annum, I mean, what is required is battery swapping at somewhere subsidized rates. Now, talking about below the line, that is the interest cost. So the differential interest cost between the diesel truck and the EV truck, if we take the interest cost same, cost of capital as same in both the cases, then it is almost 3 times. To make it equivalent, either the 3% interest rate should be reduced to 3% in case of EV trucks, which may be possible through green funds or maybe the foreign funds rate of interest that we get in Europe. And that will definitely help the EV manufacturers as well as the shippers to deploy their trucks with us. And will be open to, say, work upon one of the major areas that we see is, say, working on a model where the EV trucks can be deployed in the similar capacity as diesel trucks, and we can offer, say, 5-6 routes where they can deploy almost 100 to 500 trucks with us. Only thought is that the benefit of operating costs, which is somewhere around 25 to 30%. If part of it is passed on to us, we are open to deploy 300 to 500 trucks on higher model basis. So I will again, just to close it, I will request the policymakers to please implement at least, these 2 policies for operations. One is to increase the carrying load by the load of the batteries, equivalent load of batteries. And second is to make the toll charges free or maybe subsidized to some extent, so that operational cost can be made at least, somewhere lucrative for the shippers. And lastly, I think this is what can be very supportive to the manufacturers as well as the truck deployers, transporters, if the cost of capital is pegged at 3%. For EV trucks to bring a big boost to this sector. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saurabh, for your remarks. We have a fireside chat, but we are also going to probably kind of compress this to kind of get things done a bit early. So what we'll do is probably just invite Barsha first on the panel. We'll have a quick round of questions with you and we'll wrap up the session. So Barsha, please join us. Do you have a mic? Okay, Barsha, while we set up the mic, the question for you is simple. You've been been at the center of pretty much everything that's happening. You've been also working with a lot of shippers as well as transporters on setting up pilots and deploying electric trucks. Can you share some learnings with us?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So thank you, Atul, for this opportunity. So when we talk about pilots, the first thing that comes to mind is, let's see those trucks running on the road. But for making those electric trucks run on the road, there is a lot has to be done which goes beyond it. So the process that we followed, I would like to discuss something about that. So what we did is we engaged with different companies who are having the fleet of trucks. We started understanding their operational schedules, their fleet profiles, to identify the representative vehicle. Now, when I say representative vehicle, for example, if I take a use case, which is, let's say, e-commerce. Now, the operations from one company to other company, it differs. All of them come in e-commerce, but then the fleet or the number of trucks which is representative for one company is not the representative vehicle for the other company. And same happens with other use cases as well. Now, once we have done that, we need to understand what is the energy consumption for electric trucks. When I say energy consumption, it's not just one average number. We need to know what is the energy profile of the route, because the midpoint of the energy consumption is not necessarily will be the midpoint of the whole distance. For example, take the route of Mumbai to Pune. So if let's say it's 100 or 120 kilometers, there is an uphill at point of 60 to 80 kilometers. Now, overall, whatever is the energy consumption, in this 60 to 80 kilometers, it goes around 3 to 4 times, if I see the average number. So if I say that the average energy consumption, let's say it's 2 kilowatt per kilometer, then that's a wrong assumption, because in between these 20 kilometers, I have something around 3 or 4 kilowatt per kilometer. Now, don't take these numbers for, for writing it up. I'm just giving an example. And being said that, when we also look for the deployment of charging infrastructure, so we also need to consider when we say putting up the charging infrastructure in the warehouses, we also need to understand what is the sanctioned load of those warehouses. Now, every warehouse, it is not possible to put up these chargers, because truck chargers are typically bigger chargers, something coming around 120 kilowatt or even more. So it's also important to consider those. Now, there are certain challenges which the LSPs face. They definitely need to understand what would be their payback period. So there's a lot to be done, and I think once we start studying and learning more, before the pilots also, it's important that each and every use case is properly studied, and then we go to the pilots. And of course, there comes a major role of the OEMs, where we have the like-to-like vehicle models. We know that certain models are available, but yet there are a number of models which are needed. So yeah, that's all from my side. Yeah.
Great, thanks Barsha for that. I think one question we were supposed to put to all the panelists to say, what can we do differently? As much as we know, around 7,500 trucks, and that kind of demand was being able to aggregate at Clean Energy Ministerial. Clearly, a lot of the partners are working towards it. What could we have done differently, specifically from some of the experiences that we've heard from Vikram as well, right, on the panel? Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for that today. So thanks Barsha, Vikram, Saurabh, and Dr. Subramanian for all your thoughts and engaging us on this. Thank you so much.